In 1701, a dispute for the control of the balance of power in Europe between the Bourbon king Louis XIV of France and the Austrian Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I began the War of the Spanish Succession. France was the major European power, with Louis's main support coming from Bavaria, while Leopold, as a part of the Grand Alliance, the main support came from England, the Dutch Republic and Prussia. By 1704, the Franco-Bavarian armies of Maximilian II Emmanuel of Bavaria and Marshal Maysan, deployed on the Danube, was threatening the Habsburg capital Vienna, whose capture would lead to the collapse of the Grand Alliance. To block any interference from the Allies, the French had deployed around Maastricht a force of 46,000 men under Marshal Villeroy. Meanwhile, another French force commanded by Marshal Tallard was deployed at Strasbourg, with the 36,000 strong Austrian army of Prince Louis deployed in the defensive earthworks of the lines of Stolhofen. Another Austrian force of 10,000 men, commanded by Prince Eugene, were deployed near Ulm. The Allies realised the implications of the fall of Vienna. However, the Dutch were against any advance to help the situation. The Duke of Marlborough realised the only way for him to reinforce the Austrians was to deceive the Dutch by pretending to deploy his troops on the Moselle River, and from there marching to support the Austrian forces in southern Germany. Marlborough's force of 21,000 men began their march on May the 19th from Bedburg, with Villeroy shadowing Marlborough with a force of 30,000 men. On the 26th of May, Marlborough reached Koblenz, where he was joined by 5,000 Hanoverians and Prussians. The French believed that Marlborough was about to advance and attack Strasbourg. Marlborough enhanced this deception by constructing bridges across the Rhine at Philipsburg, which prompted Villeroy to advance to support Tallard. Marlborough then marched to Lauenburg, where he rested his troops for 3 days to enable his strung-out army to close up. On the 10th of June, at the village of Mundelsheim, Marlborough met Prince Eugene. Later joined by Prince Louis, they agreed that Prince Eugene would redeploy on the lines of Stolhofen with a force of 28,000 men to watch Villeroy and Tallard, and to prevent them reinforcing the Franco-Bavarian army on the Danube, while Marlborough's and Prince Louis's combined force of 80,000 men would seek battle with the forces of Maximilian II and Maysan. Meanwhile, Tallard and Villeroy had met and agreed that Tallard was to advance to reinforce the forces on the Danube, while Villeroy was to tie down the Allied forces in the lines of Stolhofen. However, if the Allies deployed all their forces on the Danube, Villeroy was to reinforce Tallard. On receiving the news of Marlborough's advance, Maximilian and Maysan, aware of their numerical disadvantage, deployed their forces in an entrenched camp at Dillingen on the north bank of the Danube, which Marlborough was unable to attack because of the lack of siege guns. On the 2nd of July, Marlborough's troops successfully attacked the fortress at Schellenberg, on the heights above the town of Donauwörth. This made the French-Bavarian position at Dillingen untenable, forcing them to redeploy behind the strong fortifications at Augsburg. On receiving news of Tallard's march to reinforce the French Bavarian forces, Prince Eugene realised he must join Marlborough if the Allies were not to be outnumbered. Leaving 12,000 troops in the lines at Stolhofen to tie down Villeroy, he set off southwards with the rest of his army. On receiving news of Tallard's advance, Maximilian decided not to seek any engagement until he received Tallard's reinforcements. This prompted Marlborough to undertake a controversial scorched earth policy of burning buildings and crops south of the Danube, with the aims of inducing Maximilian to either fight or surrender before Tallard arrived, and to ruin Bavaria as a base from which the French Bavarian forces could attack Vienna. Tallard joined forces with Maximilian and Marsin at Augsburg on August the 5th. On August the 7th, Prince Louis left the main Allied force to besiege the heavily defended city of Ingolstadt, to secure another crossing point over the Danube in case the capture of Donauwörth. With Prince Eugene's forces at Hochstadt on the north bank of the Danube and Marlborough's at Rhein on the south bank, on August the 9th, Tallard and Maximilian advanced to attack Prince Eugene's smaller force. On the 10th of August, Prince Eugene sent an urgent dispatch to Marlborough informing him that he was withdrawing to Donauwörth, where the following day he was joined by Marlborough. By August the 12th, the Franco-Bavarian forces were encamped by the village of Blenheim. The French Bavarian army totalled 56,000 men, while the Allies' army consisted of 52,000 men. However, despite the superior numbers of the enemy and their strong defensive position, Marlborough planned to attack. The Franco-Bavarian forces were deployed with their strength concentrated around the villages of Blenheim on their right wing, held by Tallard, Obergau in the centre, held by Marsin, and Lutzingen on their left wing, held by Maximilian. The Allies deployed their forces with Marlborough commanding the troops on the Allied left wing and centre, while Eugene commanded the Allied right wing. The Allies began their attack at around 1 p.m, with simultaneous attacks on the villages of Blenheim on their left wing and Lutzingen on their right. As the Allies closed in on Blenheim, the French fired a deadly volley. Survivors of the leading Allied units closed ranks and rushed forward, but repeated French volleys forced the Allies back, sustaining heavy casualties. As the Allies withdrew, they were attacked by the elite gendarme cavalry. However, the Hessian Brigade stood firm and with steady fire repulsed the attack, enabling the Allies to reform and launch another attack. The persistent Allied attacks on Blenheim resulted in the local French commander, without consulting Tallard, ordering his reserve battalions into the village, resulting in the French troops being overcrowded, nullifying their numerical superiority. On observing this, Marlborough ordered his troops to simply contain the enemy within Blenheim, and as a result, the 5,000 Allied troops were able to contain twice the number of French Bavarian troops. Meanwhile, on the Allied right, Eugene was facing numerically superior forces. As the Allies began their attack on the village of Lutzingen, They were met with concentrated volley and artillery fire. However, despite heavy casualties, the Allies pressed forward. Meanwhile, Eugene's cavalry were engaging the Franco-Bavarian cavalry, but after an initial success, they were forced back in confusion. Without cavalry support, the Allied infantry also withdrew in confusion, requiring Eugene's personal intervention to restore order and discipline. After rallying his troops, Eugene prepared to launch a second attack. As they advanced, they again met concentrated volley and artillery fire, and were once again thrown back in disarray. However, the French-Bavarian forces were also in disarray and could not take advantage of the situation. Meanwhile, in the centre, Marlborough advanced. Once again the gendarmes attacked, this time attempting to rout the Allied cavalry which linked the Allied infantry attacking Blenheim. However, they were pushed back in confusion. The Allied cavalry continued their advance, but were checked by French musket fire near Blenheim. Tallard then requested reinforcements from Marcin. However, Marcin refused, as he was being hard pressed by Eugene. Meanwhile, more French infantry was being redeployed from the centre towards Blenheim. The Franco-Bavarian cavalry attempted to check the Allied advance in the centre, but were met by steady volley fire from the Allied infantry, who were positioned between the cavalry units. The Allied attack in the centre began to force Marcin's troops back towards Obligau, creating a gap in the French line, leaving Tallard's left flank exposed, forcing them to withdraw towards Blenheim. In the confusion, Tallard was wounded and captured. Many of his men were drowned attempting to escape across the Danube. On observing the rout of Tallard's force, Marcin the Maximilian set fire to Obligau and Lutzingen and retreated hurriedly to the northwest. French and Bavarian casualties during the battle are estimated at between 27,000 and 40,000 killed, wounded and captured, with the Allied casualties estimated to be around 12,000. The Allied victory at the Battle of Blenheim had preserved the Grand Alliance and dented French power and influence in Europe. As a result, shortly afterwards, Bavaria was knocked out of the war. Marlborough returned to England as a national hero.